I want you to think of what is the most fun thing you can do in DCS World. Some of you guys might say dogfighting, or BVR engagements, or carrier ops. But in my humble opinion, buddy lasing is definitely in the running for that top spot of most fun thing to do in DCS World. So as you all know at this point, I'm Spud, as always. And before we get started here, I want you guys to sound off in the comment section on what you think is the most fun part of DCS World or your favorite part of DCS. And for a long time now, I have used the fantastically powerful servers provided by Fox 3 Managed Solutions for all of my large Sunday missions, and I really couldn't run my huge 50-player missions without them. And Fox 3 and their owner Luck and the team have become an integral part of the Spuds team for a long time now. So make sure you use the code on screen for 10% off of your first server. Okay guys, today we are of course taking an in-depth look at the 3 most commonly used techniques for buddy lasing, and how to perform them in DCS World multiplayer. Like anything that makes DCS multiplayer a blast, buddy lasing requires a lot of communication and coordination between the aircraft that is lasing the target and the shooter who is dropping or firing the munition. First off, we have to ensure that we have a plan worked out for which technique of buddy lasing your target, situation, or aircraft type requires, and you coordinate with the lasing aircraft to ensure that their laser designator is set to match the code for your weapons in the weapon fusing panel of the mission editor or the rearm refueling menu. Nothing is more frustrating than missing a target after a perfect application of buddy lasing techniques, so make sure that you check, and recheck those laser codes between the lasing aircraft and the shooter. So let's go ahead and get started and take a look at these techniques, moving from the simplest to the most complex. Okay guys, the first buddy lasing technique we're going to take a look at is the close formation technique. This method of guiding LGBs into a target from another aircraft is probably the easiest and quickest technique to get up and running with. This technique was used extensively by US Navy F-14 Tomcat crews over Afghanistan during the early stages of the global war on terror, due to the fact that not every F-14 in the US Navy's air wings were equipped with a lantern pod. It's also important to note for mission makers that in the 1990s and well into the 2000s, targeting pods were not nearly as ubiquitous as they are today, and it was common for only one aircraft in a section or division to carry a pod, making buddy lasing much more common and a normal standard part of air-to-ground tactics. The close formation technique is perfect for the precise delivery of LGBs onto targets from aircraft in DCS with less advanced avionics, such as the F-5E Tiger II, F-4E Phantom II, and the Mirage F-1, using weapon release cues generated by the more modern aircraft in DCS World, such as the F-14, FA-18, F-16, F-15E, or JF-17. But of course this technique can be used between 2 modern jets, just like an F-14 lasing for an FA-18C over southern Afghanistan. When it comes to executing the close formation buddy lasing technique, we of course need to designate which pilot will guide the weapon into the target and which pilot will drop the weapon, which is of course pretty easy if only one of you has a pod. For the sake of the rest of this video, we'll consider the guy with the pod to be the lasing aircraft and the guy who's going to be dropping the bomb to be the shooter. The pilot who will be lasing will lead the formation and use their targeting pod or other aircraft systems to locate and designate the target, so his or her aircraft's avionics will start to generate the release cues for the shooter. It's important for the pilot lasing the target to select a weapon in their aircraft stores management system whose ballistic profile matches that of the weapon that will be dropped by the shooter to increase the accuracy of the weapon release and ensure the LGB falls within the laser basket or cone as it's sometimes referred to. Once the target is located and designated by the lasing aircraft, the flight lead can then roll in on the target and initiate the run-in, making sure to leave enough time and separation for the shooter to get into position on your wing. The pilot flying the shooter aircraft will fly in a close fingertip formation to ensure the accurate drop that will put the weapon into the laser basket and allow it to be guided to the target. The lasing and shooter pilots should remain in constant communication as to the status of the weapon release cues, and I always recommend the lasing pilot give the shooter a solid countdown to the weapon release for the most accurate drop possible and the highest chance of the weapon seeing the laser spot. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, pickle.
Pickle.
Lasing. Once the weapon is away and falling on its ballistic arc to the target, the lasing pilot will have to manually fire their laser due to their aircraft's avionics not registering that a weapon drop has occurred, so auto-lasing will not function. I also highly recommend going for a shorter delay before firing the laser to start guiding the LGB due to the inherent inaccuracies with dropping the weapon from a second aircraft. So we want to try and ensure the laser basket is as large as possible by firing the laser a little bit earlier than you normally would for a self-laze. Of course, once the shooter has dropped their weapon, their job is now complete, and they can open up the formation or go fully defensive if required, or set up for a more defensive posture to cover the formation lead as he or she is heads down in the cockpit, lasing the weapon into the target. Close formation buddy lasing is the easiest and simplest method of buddy lasing, and can transform even the oldest and most obsolete of aircraft in DCS into an extra magazine of munitions for the most advanced and modern aircraft in the game, or serve as a method for creating a more realistic 1990s or early 2000s scenario. The second method of buddy lasing we're going to go over today is the trail method. This method is fantastic for two specific scenarios. A target that for weaponeering purposes requires the bomb to impact the front of the target, such as hitting an aircraft to the front of a hardened shelter, or you are in heavily contested airspace, allowing both aircraft plenty of space to maneuver, and the shooter to go fully defensive after weapon release while keeping the lasing jet out of the whiz of AAA or a SAM site. Unfortunately, however, this method does require your aircraft to have the ability to generate drop cues on a geographical point, such as a waypoint, so it's going to limit your aircraft types to the F-4E Phantom II for the Cold War types, or any of the modern jets in DCS. For the trail method, the shooter will lead the formation and the lasing aircraft will be the wingman. The lasing jet will drop back behind the shooter into a 5 to 7 nautical mile trail. There are a couple different methods to ensure you have adequate spacing in your trail formation. You can use your fighter-to-fighter or Link 16 data link. You can lock your shooter with your air-to-air radar, or you can use a simple TACAN yardstick. I personally always recommend using a TACAN yardstick because it's the simplest and easiest method and doesn't require any interpolation or flood our shooter's headset with lock warnings, allowing them to concentrate on the true threats to their aircraft. When it comes to maintaining adequate separation from the shooter, it's always better to err on the side of too far than too close. Just make sure you don't get out of range of your laser designator. Once your formation approaches the target, on the run-in, the shooter will release their weapon in a CCRP or auto type weapon delivery, at which point the lasing aircraft can fire their laser and guide the weapon into their target. Once again, I recommend a very short delay here before firing your laser to guide the weapon to ensure the highest possible probability that the weapon will see the laser spot and start to guide. The trail method is fantastic for hitting the front of a target. Because the lasing aircraft is so far in trail, the laser spot itself never leaves the front of the target, therefore guiding the weapon directly into the front face of the building, hardened shelter, bunker, tunnel, or bridge you're targeting. It is also fantastic for using LGBs in heavily contested airspace because it can keep the lasing aircraft outside the WES of the enemy GBAD and allow the shooter to go fully defensive once the weapon is away, because they do not have to worry about self-guiding the weapon into the target. This all makes the trail buddy lasing method fantastic for going after heavily defended and hardened targets such as MiGs parked in the shelters of an airfield in a 1990s to early 2000s scenario, before the widespread use of programmable fire and forget JDAMs. And you gotta admit, this is way more fun than getting the JDAM blues. The third and final method we're going to talk about today is the orbiting method of buddy lasing. In my experience in DCS, the orbiting method is probably the most used method of buddy lasing, but also the most difficult one to get right, because there are a much higher number of points of failure and complexities to this method. Normally, we would use the orbiting method when working with a FAC-A or forward air controller airborne, and we would be under much tighter control as the shooter, with the FAC-A utilizing 5 or 9 lines for troops in contact close air support situations, or fighter-to-fighter briefings in a SCAR type of tasking. But those are beyond the scope of today's video, and if you guys would like to see a video drilling down into 5 and 9 lines and fighter-to-fighter briefings, please let me know in the comments section down below. Thankfully, the orbit method does not require any specialized aircraft avionics, and any aircraft that can carry laser-guided munitions can be the shooter using this technique. As the shooter, we need to contact the FAC-A and receive our fighter-to-fighter briefing, 5 or 9 line for our attack restrictions and parameters, such as our run-in heading and our egress heading, and to correlate our target to ensure we can deliver our weapon into the laser basket so it can be guided into the correct target. Because this is more of a visual and on-the-fly bombing exercise, aircraft such as the F4E, F5E, Mirage F1, or Mirage 2000 should have no problem with being the shooter. As the shooter, once we are conforming to the restrictions of our briefing and have correlated our target and have been cleared hot, we need to drop our weapon on the target with the highest degree of accuracy possible, utilizing bombing tables, bombing computers, CCIP or CCRP delivery methods to ensure the weapon is right in the laser basket. Then of course, like all methods as the shooter, your job is done, and you can go defensive or recycle to set up for a re-attack if required by the FAC-A. However, the lasing aircraft, or in our example here the FAC-A, has much more difficult job, even setting aside all of the communication and situational awareness required for giving a 5 or 9 line or even fighter-to-fighter brief that we said was out of the scope for today's video. It's absolutely critical for the FAC-A to be able to communicate with the shooter to help them correlate the target for an accurate weapon drop. And the FAC-A needs to be able to flex between working with shooters with very basic visual bombing avionics that require a visual talk-on to the target, to more modern jets equipped with LSTs and everything in between. It's also extremely important for the FAC-A or lasing aircraft to ensure they know the limits of the field of view of their pod's cameras and laser, to ensure they don't inadvertently mask their laser while guiding a weapon into a target. This of course would throw the bomb off course and is especially dangerous with friendly troops in the vicinity in a close air support situation. For the FAC-A, or lasing aircraft, I highly recommend flying a pylon turn to ensure your targeting pod isn't masked during the shooter's run into the target. Or, if a more polygonal shaped orbit is required, ensure you've timed it so that way you have adequate space left in the field of view of your pod from the weapon drop all the way until weapon impact. You should also fire your laser immediately upon the shooter calling his or her shot to ensure the weapon's laser basket is as large as possible so that it will hopefully catch the laser and guide into the intended target. While there are a ton of variables and failure points in the orbit method of buddy lasing, it sure can be a ton of fun when it all works well in a large close air support scenario with lots of aircraft stacked up, eagerly awaiting their turn to support the troops on the ground. So there you have it guys, a brief tutorial and introduction to the 3 most commonly used methods of buddy lasing in DCS World. If you guys would like me to drill down more in depth to any part of this video, please let me know in the comment section down below, and please give a round of applause and big thank you to my awesome community members who volunteered to help make this video happen. So if you liked the video, please leave a like and a subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Fly safe out there and enjoy this beautiful game.